From Alachua, Florida, I'm Amrita Kaylee.
I'm Krishna Kishore.
And I'm Namamrita. Welcome to Nectar Talks, from the heart of New Raman-Reti, the largest Hare Krishna community in North America.
And the home of thousands of Bhakti Yoga practitioners. In our ongoing series of live interviews, we explore a range of spiritual topics, introducing you to inspirational community members and guest speakers with diverse backgrounds and experience.
Like bees searching for nectar, we seek to extract pearls of wisdom from how they live their lives and the spiritual lessons they can impart to us and our listeners.
If you're seeking nectar, look no further. All right.
Let's get started.
Well, Haribol, folks. This is episode 21. And today I have Doug Watson on the show. Doug is a theoretical astrophysicist with a PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University. He got involved with the BIHS, the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies, in 2019, and moved to New Raman-Reti a couple of years ago with his wife Sharanagati, who we recently had on the show. And I'm looking forward to talking with Doug today for a couple of reasons. One is I find his field of work fascinating, and he's how do I define my exposure with devotees is mostly senior devotees who joined back in the day and peers like myself who grew up in the movement. But Doug joined in his own timeline maybe a decade ago or something like that, and so I'm just very curious to hear about his discovery of Krishna consciousness. Doug, let me switch to my gallery view here so we can all see you. How are you doing? Welcome to Nectar Talks.
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful, stunning day in Alachua.
It sure is. Let's not make the rest of the country jealous here. So I have to admit, I don't fully understand the scope of your research. I looked at your CV for quite some time, trying to understand what all those credentials meant. You're involved in a lot of deep subject matters when it comes to the world of scientific research. What I do know, especially having attended a couple of BI events, is that this kind of research is really exciting. So I'm hoping that for starters, you could summarize for us what it is exactly that you do as far as your work and your research field especially.
Yeah, it's good timing because we just had a workshop last weekend at the BI. And it was a big success. We had it was invitation only, and we had about 50 participants, the majority of which have PhDs in some field of whether it's philosophy, history, or some field of science. And the general theme was just sort of trying to wrap our head around Puranic cosmology in general, and if and how that relates at all to what we know about modern cosmology. So my background is in just that, in physical cosmology. That's what I did my PhD in. So I just try and help out in any way I can when it comes to that side of things. And it's such a neat collaboration because you have people coming at it from the humanities and philosophy, and then scientists. It's very different than how it would be in regular academic settings, where when I was in the physics department, I never went to a single other building on campus. You just kind of live in your own little bubble. And this is a very collaborative, it was just fun. It was also fun to have people together in person again. Some were on Zoom overseas, but just the energy of everyone together, bouncing ideas off each other. Because ultimately the idea is not to just help educate the broader devotee community, but to sort of branch out and engage and attract scientists and scholars to bhakti. And that's, if I knew how to do that, I'd tell you, but that's if I could bottle that up, I have no idea how to do it. That's kind of the magic question.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what you do in the BI. And what about professionally? What are you involved with?
Yeah, so professionally, I left academia about 6 years ago, and I got into the field of intellectual property law, which sounds like a total 180. But basically, it's like being a science consultant to people that are writing patents, trying to protect their inventions, trying to enforce them. And I work kind of on the data science side of that, which isn't the most glamorous job in the world. I think most people couldn't imagine just like sort of sitting there and writing algorithms all day. But it's actually kind of the reverse of what Einstein did. So Einstein used to work in a patent office and write patents and stuff. And then he became a physicist, and we know how that turned out. I seem to be doing the wrong thing with the trajectory going the other way. So here we are.
Right. Well, I think between that and your work in the BI, there's a lot of exciting subject matters that you're covering, no matter what.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating and intriguing, the work that the BI does. It's also very theoretical. And I'm wondering if some listeners might be asking themselves how this relates to them. The exploration of the workings of the cosmos can seem like a field that's great for those who are really into that. But how does it relate to us? Can you connect the dots between the scientific research, this greater creation, and how it could possibly affect us as individuals?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it sounds like such a nuanced, esoteric thing. Like, who cares? I have bills to pay. You have a child to raise. There are things to do. Why do I care what the universe is doing out there? But on the other hand, it's
I'm
kind
obviously
of
playing devil's advocate.
I mean, it really it's a unique science because it's the physical situation that is the context for human life,
Right.
and it causes people to think about what is our place in the universe, why are we here, what's the purpose, and basically my own work in cosmology ultimately was not fulfilling because it wasn't answering those questions. So I guess kind of taking up more of a spiritual PhD has been much more satisfying, and sort of understanding how to draw the whole picture together, the whole cosmic picture, into how to live your own life, essentially.
That's interesting that you mentioned that for you it wasn't fully satisfactory as far as I guess your questions of the bigger picture of life and where we fit in. My uncle Brian Greene, which you know is a scientist, having observed him and just seeing how he approaches his work, I can tell he's coming from an existential platform. Would you say it's like that for most scientists from your experience in the field, or is there kind of a mix of those who are really coming at it from a gut-wrenching, I got to figure out what this world's all about and where am I coming from? Right. Or is it something else for some scientists?
That's such a good question. I mean, I'm sure if you polled all of them, there would be a whole broad spectrum. But you're going into a field where you're not going to make a lot of money, and B, it's going to be very, very rigorous and hard. So you must have some real, genuine love for it, or you would go work on Wall Street or something. I don't know. But often the story is, especially in astronomy and cosmology, is that they've just always been kind of obsessed with what's going on out there, and they just want to know more. And so science is one tool to try and learn about that, learn about the universe. That's a tool that you can use, and is one that you'll find through going the regular academic channels. But the truth is, you kind of start out with this awe and wonder about the universe. But then you sort of just narrow in on your own research projects and you're just plugging away at these things and you kind of lose sight of the bigger picture, actually.
Right.
And it wasn't until I actually stepped out of it finally that I started thinking about the broader context even more. Because it's like most fields, you get into your little specific area and you hone in on it so much that it's hard to step back and see why you got in it in the first place.
Right. So where did all of this start for you? Were your parents in science? Did you stare at the stars a lot as a kid?
I stared at a soccer ball when I was a kid. That's
okay.
No, but actually, yeah.
And you mean that very seriously, because I know you actually had a professional career as a soccer player at some point too.
No, both my parents actually are scientists. And my brother too. My dad has a background in math, and he was sort of a math and computer science professor for a little bit, and then went into the private sector. And my mom, which was quite amazing, she retired, but she was an immunologist at the National Institutes of Health, which was fascinating because I should probably cringe at me saying this, but she's about to turn 75. So you can imagine back when she was in her early 20s, leaving college, getting into this field where she was the only woman and basically working her way in and proving herself that way and having a long and pretty illustrious career in that field is really amazing.
Wow. Pioneering.
Yeah, but my parents are extremely open-minded, and they're very curious about Krishna consciousness. And well, so that's them. And then my brother, he leans.
I'm making a note of that though, because that'll be. Definitely want to hear more about that later on.
Okay. My brother studied physics and philosophy undergrad. He is like, I can't help but like interject puns. He's like light years smarter than I am. And so that was his background. He did a master's in philosophy, and that's mostly Western philosophy, and that can get a little dreary and bleak. So He was kind of straddling that abyss a little too long and got out of that and went into do a master's in physics, and ultimately went to med school, and he's a doctor now. So it's a much
family business is what it sounds like. I mean, no wonder.
I didn't have those tendencies. I was much more into chasing a soccer ball and chasing girls and having fun. And my brother is much more into academics, just much smarter. And it took me a lot longer. In fact, I did not have the standard trajectory of go to college, go to grad school, blah, blah, blah. I took quite a bit of time off, and I played soccer professionally, and then I traveled around a bunch. And it was no pressure whatsoever for my parents to go into science. They just, whatever made me happy, whatever I wanted to pursue, they were behind me. It just so happened that was the thing. Right.
Okay, great. I mean, it sounds like you had a pretty nice upbringing, and the way you got into your career was pretty relaxed, and you kind of took your time discovering where you wanted to go. And now are you happy in this field? Any, looking back and how you came to it, does it all still make sense for you?
Yeah, I mean, in one way, I don't know if it could have gone any other way, because here we are. But it's sitting here at 44 years old looks much better than I ever thought it would be when I was, in my 20s and 30s. Right. I love the path it's taken, and you still haven't seen it yet, but we have our little mini burgeoning farm sanctuary at our house. with animals every day.
I know you moved here in 2020 from California.
Yeah.
And I see you and Shara are just, you're multiplying the amount of animals that you have on your little farm. Tell me a little bit about that. Your move to Alachua. What prompted that, and what's your experience being here in this community so far?
Yeah, so I grew up on the East Coast and right outside of DC, and I went off to college in the Midwest, vowing never move back to the East Coast. I just never thought it would happen. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, when we were living in Los Angeles, and we look back on that with no regret. It was a wonderful time. Great. We have so many great memories, but sort of I guess a year after we were there is when COVID came around, and we had started like just getting a little more engaged with our spiritual practice back then. And then with the onset of lockdown and everything, we were feeling very disconnected. And we had tossed around the idea of maybe moving back to Alachua because her parents were moving back. So the lockdown and that isolation really was the impetus for taking it seriously. And then we just kind of did a handshake on it, and we're like, let's do it. Let's move back. Let's go for it. And it was the best decision we've ever made, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. What was your setting in California? Were you in an apartment, in a house over there? And what did your life look like before you moved here?
It was kind of classic LA. We were paying $1,800 a month to live in a renovated garage.
Oh, wow.
Cost of living out there is something else, but we were well outside of the hustle and bustle, kind of up in the Santa Monica Mountains area, if you know that. Just stunningly beautiful. Yeah. And since I like to run a lot and run on trails, it was landscape wise, it was perfect for me. I loved it out there, just loved it. And the weather you couldn't beat. But it's really isolating. I had friends out there, and I would see them, maybe once every few months, because it's at least 45 minutes to anywhere. So you are quite a bit isolated.
Yeah, gotcha. So I want to dive into your discovery of Krishna consciousness. And my guess is you must have first heard it through your wife, Shara, when you met her at the time, maybe not. Tell me a little bit about, maybe a little bit about how you met Shara, and then what was your initial contact with this philosophy and this tradition?
I'll try and do it justice, especially with meeting Shara, because she jokes around that if you ever wanted to make like a really successful sleeping app, just record me talking or telling a story. You can just drift off to sleep. So I'll try and get more animated, but it's kind of my natural monotone tendency.
I'm loving it, Doug. Just keep going. I'm not going to fall asleep.
We were we had Tamra and Loka over last night, and we were just talking about how we met. And I don't know, maybe Shara had mentioned it on her podcast, but we met online in that old-fashioned romantic way.
Right.
And she, it was the kind of site that you pay for, so it kind of weeds out the creeps.
Okay.
And before I met her, I had always dabbled in vegetarianism, never stuck with it. But I had been for about 6 months up till I met her, and that was becoming more of a priority. And, she just had her list of values, and I had mine, and they kind of meshed. And we met, and I think it was a little more lopsided. I was very much more like jaw to the floor when I met her, and she was either just like politely being more reserved or wasn't feeling it. I don't know. but the nice thing is we just started a conversation, and it was very, it was a lot more like old school traditional. In a sense, I just kind of courted her for like months. By courted, I mean I stalked her for like months. And we just got to know each other really well,
Right.
which is had not been my experience in the past. Everything rushes so quickly in these sorts of things. And
Right.
she was very cautious. So I reluctantly was very cautious. And we just took our time. We really took our time.
Yeah, great. And so tell me, was it through her that you first heard about Krishna, or had you heard about the Hare Krishnas or Bhakti Yoga prior to meeting Shara?
Nope. I was fully entrenched in a different world, and I just knew about Hare Krishnas from pop culture stuff, with all the stereotypical things that go along with that. And so she had told me that she was raised Hare Krishna, and I didn't really know what that meant, but it was more through. So first, I owe everything to her because she introduced me to it. Secondly, I owe the next level to her father, because Panchatattva has this just unbelievable ability to explain things to someone like me, because some of the stuff can be quite nuanced, esoteric, very different from what you've normally learned or how the world works. But he's really stuck to the ABCs of the philosophy and sort of guided me through it slowly. And I was very attracted to that. He just has such a gift for being able to explain all of these topics.
What are some of those ABCs that you remember from that time?
Well, to start with, I didn't really understand when he would say something like the soul or that. I wouldn't know what that meant. I just sort of know like the traditional Western philosophy idea of a soul, where I couldn't really pinpoint what would be being talked about at that point. Is it consciousness? Is it mind? I didn't really know what a soul was. And it seemed kind of archaic and outdated. I didn't know what we were talking about. But it was more, well, so maybe I should step back. So the reason I was getting into the vegetarianism and veganism and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was curious about that, actually.
Yeah, was primarily for some health reasons, but also philosophically, it made perfect sense to me. So it was little things like that where we would talk about it, and you would say, "Oh, well, here, look in this verse. It talks about stuff almost exactly what you're talking about that makes sense to you." And he would sort of walk me along that way.
So he was really literally holding the Bhagavad Gita as he was explaining things for you.
Yeah. And the most important thing, before I forget, which I usually forget to mention, is that he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, if you're really open-minded, if you're an open-minded scientist, then be open-minded before you approach this book, that there may be a God. Just start from there. Just say, okay, there is a God, and now let's start reading it together.
Right.
And sort of,
so it's such a good exercise to do that.
Yeah. I don't know if that's normally how it's done, but it's
I know I've said that to some friends, just for the sake of the exercise, just put yourself in the shoes of someone who's open to an idea of God, and then read it from that standpoint, which is great. Yeah. Actually, I just recently watched the interview that Jay Shetty did with Will Smith. And Will Smith was explaining that because he's an actor, he is very comfortable doing that. He can put himself and his whole being in the position of a different character. And that's how he's been studying the Bhagavad Gita, with Jay Shetty kind of mentoring him through it. So that's
cool.
Great point. And I'm glad you're reminding us of that approach. I think it's a healthy one, especially for someone like you that has such a analytical background, and you probably look at things with a kind of a keen eye and maybe ready to point out, no, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah, my lack of humility was very apparent, because every little thing I would just nitpick and be like,
yeah,
well, that can't be right.
Right. No, I think that's good. That's a great way to study the Gita.
Yeah, because some of it, there's talk of some certain rituals, and I would admit, yeah, I won't even bring them up. It's so embarrassing in hindsight. But either way, it's just that it's hard, and I couldn't fully get there, and that's why it took me so long to get to where I am now, is because the idea of God or a God or gods was so far away from my thinking, my training, my upbringing, my surroundings, my environment. I just was thinking, it's the 21st century, like people are still talking about this stuff. Like, isn't that out the window?
Right. Did you have any spiritual conceptions that you did hold on to, yourself, separate maybe even from an idea of God as a person or anything like that? Where were you situated spiritually growing up, would you say?
I don't know. It wasn't like a topic of conversation, or where there wasn't like introspection in the self in that way. It was more just like the typical existential, what are we doing here? What's the point? Okay. I better go to a bar and have a beer and not think about it. And just life. So yeah. And that is no, I have to say that's no knock on my parents, because I lived an absolutely privileged life of, unconditional love. My parents are just, they support me in everything.
Right.
And they just wanted me to have no external biases coming in, to find my own path, however I would do that.
Yeah.
Because they had a kind of a typical experience growing up in the Catholic Church and other things that really, really turned them off.
Yeah.
To anything religious.
Right. As you learned about the philosophy, and I'm sure it took a lot of time, what were some of the points that really kind of grabbed your attention?
Well, what really clicked for me, that I think was what was sort of the game changer, was we'll see how much I want to divulge here. It's not always easy to talk about, but in my early 30s, I had some very intense life circumstances and mental health problems while I was in graduate school. Stuff that really, really brings you to your knees. So going to a life of where I had so much success in everything with soccer and academics and this and that, to being in a position where you're just completely humble and desperate. And that puts you in, that gives you a shift of consciousness. So to me, that started bringing about the idea of, well, how can I sit around and judge other people, because I have no idea what they're going through.
Right.
And then it was that fifth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that I think her dad may have shown me first, or either I arrived at it through reading about Samadarshana. And it was, it's a very famous verse about seeing things with equal vision.
Right.
And it wasn't,
Yes,
it didn't,
company.
yep. It didn't strike me as some sort of kumbaya over sentimental empathy for everything kind of thing, but an actual rational seeing the non-difference and everything. And that cultivates a level of compassion that I didn't have and I didn't know I was capable of.
Mm.
And it wanes a lot, but I come back to that a lot. So that particular verse, I think, is what really started propelling me farther down or farther up.
Right.
However you want to look at it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a very powerful verse, and it encompasses so much of what most traditions seem to focus on, love your neighbor and the golden rule.
Yeah.
But
But it
yes.
was very specific. It's like,
Right.
it's not just love your other human beings. It's
Everyone.
like literally an Atma in every.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think I don't know if we had talked about this, but your guru, I believe, did we mention this? I had heard, so this is just what I had heard. Was that's the verse that he quotes the most?
Yeah, I mean, he by far that is the verse he's always quoting, Radhanath Swami. So definitely something special about that for him as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier this idea of how Krishna consciousness, or just the Hare Krishnas, was nothing more than what you've heard through pop culture. Couple of different directions I want to go with that. One is as of a few months ago, I'm on this committee called ISKCON's Relevance in North America. And so we're very much trying to strategically put some efforts to make this society and this philosophy in North America become more prevalent, other than just people with robes and all that. But yeah, tell me a little bit about your experience with that. Did you make a connection? Oh, this Shara's dad, he's talking to me about this philosophy. That's those Hare Krishnas. Yeah, maybe a little bit about your experience discovering more of the actual society for Krishna consciousness as you met devotees and maybe visited temples and things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, as I started visiting temples and meeting Shara's friends, essentially no one was wearing robes. They all look like us.
Right.
They all had normal lives, but the sense of community was quite special, and the way that it wasn't just like a Sunday thing to make you feel better and then get on with your life. It was something that was truly lived, and with a higher purpose. Mm-hmm. So it was slow because we were isolated. We were in Chicago and then LA, and it's become. There's a reason that our practice has gotten so much stronger since we've been here, is because we're just around so many devotees, and the more I know, like, they've got jobs. They're just people working hard at something, and I find that really admirable. And everyone comes from different walks of life. It's not just artists and people drawn in that way, but through the BI, it's so important to have like-minded people if you want to stay engaged.
Right.
So when I got to the BI and there were these pencil-pushing nerds talking about physics and other things, I was like, whoa, you guys are devotees? It's amazing. So that just keeps you more and more engaged, and then you learn more and more. And for me, it's like, on the one hand, it's exciting. It's like being a first-year grad student. The whole thing is just open, and there's so much to learn. And on the other hand, I feel so far behind, and I know so little, and it can be a little daunting in that way. just because you move into a committee where people are a community where people have been living this and they know everything so well. And I just feel like I have so far to go.
Well, it's going to be it's a fun journey no matter what. I got a long way to go myself, and I'm born in this, so don't worry. Tell me about your introduction to the BI. How did that all come about? Who did you meet as part of that institution? Which I picked this off of Krishna.com's website, but the BI's objective is to establish the scientific merits of Krishna consciousness and to encourage academic study of the soul. It's a beautiful summary of what the BI does. So how did you come in contact with them, and how did that develop to where you're now hosting the latest events?
Yeah. So it started back a few years ago when, I don't know why. First of all, I apologize. Can you hear my dog snoring in the background? He like really lets it rip and it's loud.
I can't.
Okay.
I don't know if it'll come out on the recording or not, but we'll know what it is.
It'll be adorable if it does. Yeah. So for some reason or another, in YouTube's infinite wisdom, it suggested a video of Howard Resnick giving this speech, Hridayananda Maharaj. Just Howard Resnick. This guy's wearing a polo shirt and he's at a lectern at a public university talking philosophy. It sounds very similar to Krishna consciousness, but without the word Krishna or anything like that. And I was like, wow, this guy is so sharp. What, like, this is amazing philosophy. And then later learned that was him. And so I reached out to him and just, wanted to say how much I enjoyed his lecture. And
when was this? When you were in California?
Yeah, I think that would have been 2019. So he put me in touch. He was sort of like, okay, you're Sharanagati's husband. Okay, let's get you in touch with people at the BI.
Okay.
And I don't know the exact sequence of events, but it happened really, really quickly to the point where I started participating within a short amount of time.
Were they, looking at your credentials and, was that appealing to the devotees at the BI, your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's important if you're trying to relay complex topics in science or consciousness to the general public or to the scholarly community, that the people that are doing it have credentials that they recognize. So they very much like that. So that helped a lot, but I just felt like I wasn't sure what I had to offer because I didn't know enough about the philosophy. I didn't know how to tie things together, but they were just so great. They were like, don't worry about it. Just, help us with your expertise and we can help you formulate it into a way that is more in line with Krishna consciousness. So it was just a really cool symbiotic relationship. Everyone was just really welcoming.
It's an amazing team. I mean, all the devotees at the BI here in Gainesville are just so sweet, just a great group of people to work with.
And so dedicated. They all have jobs or other things, but they, like Brahmatirtha, I mean, that guy, I don't think he sleeps more than 30 minutes a night. He's always on it. Right. And he works so tirelessly, just, trying to fulfill Prabhupada's mission with the BI.
Yeah. What's your exact position at the BI? Do you have a title on that team?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the website in a long time. I'm not sure.
But I know you hosted this event, and I missed it. I'm hoping there's some recordings somewhere that I can see. But you must obviously have some good communication skills to have done that. What were some of your roles during that event?
So it's fun. Usually when I talk about science or this kind of thing that I'm excited about to Shara, her eyes kind of glaze over and she looks off in the distance. But this crowd, they're in it, they're sucked in, they love it. So I was the workshop chair, which just meant like I helped figure out who we wanted to invite, what the schedule events would be, who the speakers would be. I gave my own sort of introductory talk to the whole workshop, and then sort of led the discussions throughout the rest of the weekend. But so many people were involved in so many aspects, from behind the scenes. I mean, it took a good sized team to put one of these together. Ultimately, it's because we want to have a larger conference in a year that is not just, insular to the devotee community, but to the larger scholarly community.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask, what are the results that we can go look at from this conference? But it was kind of a stepping stone towards this next one.
It's classified.
Okay. Well, speaking of classified,
there's a segue to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
What are some? Because you're in the know. What are some of the latest advances in the field of science, whether it's through the BI or just your knowledge of science in general? Are there things happening right now that are just, this is the first time in history that we've made these scientific advances or discoveries? What's going on out there?
Well, I think I'll see if I can articulate this well. So there are kind of two things. On the one side, the reason I got so into this and decided to propose this workshop was that normally the sort of popular idea in cosmology is that there's this something happens, some event, a big bang, we'll call it a big bang, happens, the universe is born, and it evolves from there. There are some problems with that, both scientifically and philosophically, and scientists themselves are taking this very seriously. And a lot of alternatives are coming up that have to do with cyclic models of cosmology. And as you know, Puranic cosmology is a cyclical one. The universe creates, maintains, annihilates, starts all over again. And these sort of corollaries are happening in modern cosmology, where these are viable models for how the universe works. So just right there, we're kind of in the conversation. Second, is the most fascinating part about physics, without getting too into the weeds, is the idea of quantum physics, where if you observe a system, you're immediately kind of affecting it just by observing it through your own consciousness. And this came about in the 1930s, and it's the bedrock of all physics. It's the most well-tested theory out there, and it's passed every test. It's kind of a real monumental achievement for science, just quantum theory in general.
Yeah.
But there's still the pesky problem that comes up, which is, does consciousness play a role in how reality unfolds? Because without worrying about the math or anything, basically a system can be changed by whether or not it's observed. So the BI, of course, has a materialistic and non-materialistic view of reality, where consciousness absolutely plays a role. And for the last 50 years, science has tried to work out ways to get rid of consciousness as playing any particular part at all in how the physical world operates. So a lot of our thinking is how do we, so there's a group at the BI that does more of the neuroscience stuff, which is how the mind and brain interface and consciousness's role in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also on the side that I'm more interested in, the pure physics side, in in our philosophy, the role of the observer is very important. The intention of the observer, the free will, and even beyond that, the external observation of Vishnu, or however you want to say it. There's always witnessing going on, and intention that can change how reality unfolds. So trying to come up with ways to incorporate something non-material, consciousness, into how physical reality plays out is sort of a big thrust at the BI. And it's really exciting because that's what's going on in mainstream science as well.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's a really special time right now for the devotee scholars to sort of slip in there,
right,
and start attracting people by speaking their language in a coherent way.
Fantastic. What are some examples of how an observer can change a system and how it behaves?
Oh boy.
Or
So we
maybe
have
one
like
example.
3 hours, right? Is that
Let's do one example, 3 minutes.
I'm just going to solve all of quantum mechanics for the last 100 years. The basic idea is that at the very, very tiniest scales, everything exists kind of in a probabilistic state, and nothing really manifests until it's observed. And this is actually a consequence of the math itself. It's not something hokey. But there are clever ways where you can get around that, where it says that the observation doesn't actually matter. So for instance, people will say, well, consciousness can't matter and how can't have any importance in how reality unfolds, because if you believe in evolutionary science, then millions of years ago, there weren't any conscious observers. So how would reality unfold if there weren't any conscious entities to observe it? We, of course, don't really have an issue with that because there's always a conscious entity or entities observing at all times.
Right.
So it is at the most fundamental level of physics that it's sort of a state of unrealized potential that doesn't actually actuate until it's measured or observed, however you want to define that. So that's just at the most fundamental level of physics.
Wow.
And it's been just swept under the rug for so many years because people, what's the point of knowing that philosophy? Let's just use the theory to make cell phones and computers and all these other things with that math.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I like how you're saying that, this is a perfect timing for the BI. You're a fairly young scientist. Where do you see your career moving forward, and what are you trying to accomplish when it comes to all this?
So everyone has their own goal. There's the overarching goal of just trying to attract more people to Krishna. And that's obviously a big task, but there are many avenues to do that. The BI is just one particular little small area. So for me, I'm almost curious just in the question itself, by self-examination. I still can't pinpoint how I was drawn in. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be some combination of my background and science and what's said in the Bhagavatam and other things. But just I'm trying to understand how my own experience and how I've been drawn to it could help me sort of take that show on the road and attract other people to what we're doing here.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like. I wish I knew.
Yeah.
But long term, there are a couple books I'd like to write that I've been working on. Those will be very long term, and they're meant more towards to the devotee community in terms of providing knowledge about science as we know it and how it relates to consciousness. So a way
Uh-huh.
that's easily digestible for pretty much everybody. But I don't know. I mean, 5 years ago, I never thought I'd be sitting here on a podcast talking about any of this. So
Right.
I have no idea.
Yeah. I correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe someone will correct me after the podcast is published, but I believe Srila Prabhupada started the BI in 1966. I mean, just a year after he founded the society. And there may or may not be an official answer to this question, but why do you think Srila Prabhupada puts so much emphasis on the BI?
Oh my God. I have wow.
I can help with my own ideas. Do you think it's just to prove God through science, or is it more to stimulate a higher level of discussion in the world? Or, just working with the BI, where do you think that springboard is coming from?
Gosh, it's such a good question, and I don't know. You hear different answers from different people, so I can't say with any authority.
Yeah, I'm kind of asking, just coming from you and knowing that this was started by Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah.
I'm not asking for the exact answer, but with that idea that this was, obviously a big priority for Srila Prabhupada, what do you think is the mood behind it?
Well, I have been told, this is just through what people have told me, is that he recognized that in the West, that scientists, like the intellectual class, like some of the smartest minds were working in science, but they were also some of the most physicalist or materialist leaning people. So a way to engage and attract that sort of class of people to bhakti is at least part of what I think the mission was, because those people have a lot of sway over how the rest of the population thinks.
Right. That's a really good point. Yeah. Now that you're pretty familiar with the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, you're familiar with the scientific world, you have your own spiritual journey. How do you look at it when it comes to this question of science and God and religion? Do you feel one can prove the other? Are they meant to just go hand in hand? How do you see that relationship?
I don't know. Part of me is just, one, follow my curiosity, and two, practice something that people before me have shown is successful and leads and is sort of the purpose of life for self-realization and to know Krishna. So I'm not like, humility doesn't come easy to me, especially as a former pro athlete and stuff. It's not easy for me to sort of just give in and be submissive to these things, but more and more, it's just try and just practice what's being taught to you and not be stubborn about it and take to it. Mm-hmm. You're truly inquisitive, then do it. Then do the practice. See what happens. See how you experience it. See how your life changes.
Yeah. How does that look like for you? Have you developed some kind of sadhana or some regular? What are your practices?
Yeah, I mean, I do my best to do 16 rounds every morning, and other than coffee,
which you still owe me.
I do.
We're supposed to get together.
I know. So I do my best to do that without the expectation that I'm supposed to be feeling something or receiving something or this and that, but just that um, that's what is advised to do, and that's the science of it. So that's what I'm trying to do as best as I can. And Shar and I don't have any kids. I have a busy job, but I can make the time to do it. So right now that's what I'm doing as best I can. Yeah.
Fantastic.
It ain't easy, but it's nice.
It is a discipline for sure.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate that you're doing it by the book. If you're planning 16 rounds every morning, that's great.
That hasn't been going on for years. This is
sure, of course.
Gradual.
What a beautiful standard that we have to always strive for, though.
Yeah, exactly.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So let's circle back around. Tell me a little bit about how your parents have processed your discovery of Krishna consciousness and, moving to this community, getting pretty involved with the BI and, how much have they seen of temples and how do they feel about it?
My parents are so incredible. I mean, my dad was the youngest of 8 in a very blue collar Ohio family. And he was the only one to go to college. And, but all that being said, he's just very open to whatever I'm willing to pursue. And in the same way, so is my mom. And not just in the way that, go have fun, see where it leads you. They're genuinely curious about where in fact it's leading me and what they could learn from it. So they've put up with all of my strange pursuits. Like,
Right.
We've talked about with my like crazy long running stuff and like all the other wacky things I've done. They never stand in the way. And with this, I mean, all they see peripherally is just that I'm happier, a more sense of calm. I have a partner that fulfills me, and we're happy here. And they come down here and they see that like there's something going on here. Like they did go to the temple and they got to meet people, and it's just natural to be very gravitated towards a community where people seem to all be chipping in different ways. And they just couldn't help but notice that most people are smiling a lot.
Yeah.
And just seem generally happy.
Right.
So my dad is very much the analytical type. He tries to dissect all the books and try and understand them as best he can. And my mom just thinks it's all really cool. That's just her. And they're moving down here for the winters.
Really?
Starting next year. So,
nice.
We'll get him in. We'll get him to sip on that Kool-Aid a little bit.
Just keep feeding them that Charnamrita.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Watson, this was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for interviewing Shara. She loved it, and people keep coming up to her and saying thank you for sharing your story, because she was so open about her recovery and everything she went through. And that woman saved my life. So I appreciate the story out there.
And together you have some wonderful things to do in this world. So we appreciate both of you. And I have been getting also great feedback from her interview, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the good feedback from this one as well.
Yeah, maybe it'll be a good sleep app. We'll see.
All right, Doug. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
All
and
right.
we'll see everybody on our next episode.
All right,
Krishna.
Hare Bol.
Hare Bol.